Okay, well, welcome to the next instalment of Horror Not Horror, where we have a look at examples of horror entertainment in otherwise non-horror franchises and pieces. Today, I am once again joined by Oliver Giggins. Oliver, hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm alright. How are you, Ash?
Yeah, I'm not too bad actually. I'm doing all right. Now, today we're discussing something that is. It has a reputation, actually, for the horror elements within it. It has a reputation for being something that sends people behind the sofa, although it is primarily a science fiction show. It is, of course, Doctor Who. And we're going partly back to the beginning. I say partly back to the beginning because we're going back to the start of New Who, which, to be honest, 15 years in, it feels a bit weird and wrong to still keep calling it New Who.
Especially since it looks like it could get cancelled in the next couple of years, at which point then we will have a third reboot, and we'll have the original series, the new series that is the older series, and then the new series that is the new series.
Exactly. And also, if you look at the more recent series of Doctor Who and you compare it to Series 1 of the reboot, there is such a great difference in style and tone between those two elements as there is between Series 1 of the reboot and the latter end of the classic series. So it does feel a little bit weird to still be calling it the reboot, but we are. And today we are looking at the third episode of this first series of the reboot, which is the Unquiet Dead. What are your initial thoughts of that?
I've always liked Christopher Eccleston's series as a whole. I do think it is one of the, if not the strongest overall series of the new version of Doctor Who. Christopher Eccleston's great. We get some more stuff with Rose, and there's a nice sort of counterbalance where you've got the more kind of alien-y side of the Doctor Who. Of course, you can use dead bodies as homes for other people, whereas Rose has the more kind of doctory side. It all fits together to have Charles Dickens and Christmas and some kind of ghosty story together without kind of being overplayed.
Yes, yeah. That's something I definitely noticed about the Christmas specials, that they weren't just set at Christmas or about Christmas, but they were Christmas! It was very much in your face. It was, okay, we're going to do a Christmas special. These aliens that are invading are dressed as Santas, and they
have Christmas trees that rotate around the room and try to kill everyone.
It was silly fun, but it did feel a little bit like it was very much shouting it at you that this was a Christmas special and you better not forget that it's a Christmas special. Whereas The Unquiet Dead feels Christmassy enough, and it's an episode that you can throw on at Christmas, but doesn't really ram it down your throat. And
it also, I feel, has a nice, like the Van Gogh episode later on, it gives you a nice idea of the person, while the historical person still fits into the story. You get this idea of Dickens as a man who's nearing the end of his life and has regrets and stuff.
Yeah, he doesn't really feel shoehorned in. I mean, he feels natural to the story, and the way he behaves in the story feels natural as well. And it is very Dickensian in many ways as well. The Undertaker character just sounds like a Dickens name, Sneed and Company. It sounds very Dickensian. And everything about it, I think, really encapsulates that Dickensian world, that Victorian world, and that Christmas feeling. It's a wonderful mix of everything that kind of works.
I saw the other Dickensian, the one literally called A Christmas Carol, a few months ago, and just to compare the two, this one does do it sort of a lot more effortlessly and less saccharinely than the one that really tried to be a Charles Dickens story.
Yeah, it works with the characters, and it works with the world of Charles Dickens and that kind of heightened Victoriana that we see through Dickensian adaptations. I mean, it's the BBC, just coming off its phenomenal run of period dramas in the 90s. Things like Pride and Prejudice and Our Mutual Friend, and some of the best period dramas ever made. So it's not entirely surprising that they managed to get this so right. And of course, Simon Callow playing the role of Charles Dickens, has done a lot with that role. He's done one-man shows where he's taken on Dickens and performed as Dickens, giving the readings and the stories as Dickens did. And that was something interesting to see in the episode as well. So just to kind of recap the story, the Doctor and Rose, they arrive in 1869, believing initially it's to be Vienna in 1860, but it's actually Cardiff in 1869, and they're out wandering around, experiencing Victorian Wales, and they hear a scream. Heading off to a theatre where Charles Dickens is performing, they find that there's an old woman who is essentially emanating some sort of spiritual force, and we discover that this woman is actually dead, and she's got up and walked away from the undertakers, from Sneed and Company. And so the Doctor goes after them because they kidnap Rose, and he goes after them by commandeering Charles Dickens's carriage. And they get back to the Undertakers, and they discover that actually what's happening is these alien entities are taking over the dead in order to try and come through to our reality, to try and save themselves. Turns out to all be a big scam in the end, and they're actually bad guys trying to get through, and they're essentially gas monsters. It's a spook story. It involves spiritualism, it involves seances, it involves ghosts, it involves the undead, it involves everything that makes not only a Dickensian ghost story, but a compelling modern ghost story as well.
Yes, it also, I think it has a very good sense of humour. For example, when we have the bodies first coming back to life, and Sneed is just his first response on seeing a reanimated corpse is, "Oh no, not again."
Yeah, I've actually made a note of that in my notes. That was one thing that stood out was, we've got another one! Gwyneth, we've got another one!
And yes. She judges him, and he's there going, "It's not my fault!"
Yes, it plays with the humour quite nicely, which I don't want this to turn into a Doctor Who specific review, but I do find that the earlier series of the reboot managed to be humorous with a lot less effort than I found the last 5 or 6 series.
Yes, this one has, I think, one of the most chilling, at least to me, lines near the end when you discover that Gwyneth was dead from the moment she went into the arch, and this idea that they were unknowingly communicating through a corpse for about 5 minutes, and that these otherworldly beings were basically just puppeting her. And that, in that time, that they were just kind of standing there thinking something else was going. Her corpse was standing in the doorway, slowly going cold.
Yeah. That was quite unnerving, and the Doctor's line a little later on, when he explains that he couldn't save her, was because she was already dead, and she was dead the moment she stepped into the rift. That's really unsettling and really unnerving. I liked the character of Gwyneth. She was rather well drawn for what we got from her, because we didn't get a lot of time with her, but what we did get from her was interesting. We got backstory, we got a little bit about how she grew up and who she was, the hopes and dreams that she had, which helps make her death and sacrifice, even though it wasn't a knowing sacrifice, it makes her death and sacrifice even more hard as a viewer.
She's just a good person. She is someone who is just trying to do the right thing with this gift and gets taken in by these creatures in the same way that the Doctor gets manipulated by his guilt.
Exactly. And with Gwyneth, she's portrayed as psychic, and am I right in thinking that whether or not she is genuinely psychic is never properly explored, and it's just kind of assumed that the entities have been the only ones that have been speaking to her through her life? Am I right? Have I completely misunderstood that?
I think there's a certain amount of ambiguity, because she does get a vision of future London, seeing the planes in the sky and cars. So I suppose you could argue that maybe the Gelth, that is more information that the Gelth are getting out of Rose and then kind of rerouting through her. But at the very least, it is explicitly said that her powers are coming from the rift and from, at least getting severely amplified by what is going on in the house.
So I think the whole Victorian setting, it really plays quite nicely with the spiritualism setting as well, because this is only 20 years after the advent of spiritualism, and at this point in history it was a huge thing in America and in Britain. So it's not unusual or even out of place. It's not something that's just gimmicky. This is something that was regularly happening. These seances in the parlour were frequent occurrences.
It's also, re-watching it, it's effortlessly goes into the seance that I'd forgotten that this is an episode in which the Doctor has an actual seance, and they're all sitting around the room, sitting around a table trying to communicate using explicitly stuff that Gwyneth has learnt from watching other mediums. And yeah, it all, even though by this point we've already established that it's probably not a ghost, it all, is effortlessly goes into that and works together.
Yeah. One of the other things that I kind of picked up on, which I quite liked, it was another kind of funny throwaway line, is when they're heading into Sneed's house, Dickens is kind of looking around a little bit shocked and in awe and just says, "What the Shakespeare is going on?" And I just found that deeply amusing, just because obviously the current phrase, modern phrase, is "what the Dickens is going on." With the rest of the episode, I think it had a solid story. I think it had a very strong story, and it was written by Mark Gatiss, who has actually done a lot of horror and horror adaptations. We tend to think of him as a comedian and a comedy writer and actor, but actually he's done a hell of a lot of horror. A couple of years ago, he did an M.R. James adaptation for Christmas.
And most recently, the Dracula. His most recent credit is probably the Dracula he did with Stephen Moffat.
Of course, yes, which I'm still to watch and need to actually give that a viewing. I think as far as characters go, Gwyneth is one of the best one-off characters we see. And that's definitely something that early New Who did quite well. It would give you characters that you genuinely cared about, even if they were just one-offs. So what do you think about it as a horror story, as a horror piece?
I think it works really well up until the Gelth suddenly sprouts teeth and goes red and starts monologuing slightly. I feel like we get into a bit of a cartoony villainy thing, where it's up to that point they seemed a lot clever and manipulative and unfeeling, and then that slightly lessened after that, when we've just got them saying what their plan is while a group of bodies get up.
Yeah, I think it definitely does lose something. As soon as the more science fiction elements come through, I feel it loses something as a story. I mean, Doctor Who has always provided answers for the paranormal and supernatural, there being an explanation for it scientifically. But it would have been nice to have something a little more ambiguous, not necessarily being too clear, because you're right, when the Gelth, when they turn from blue to red and they turn demonic, it was very Russell T Davies, wasn't it?
Yes, and it's also, I mean, part of the problem is it's just unexplained. We know why they're gas creatures, they've lost their physical forms, and so them being blue gas creatures just makes sense, but why suddenly do they decide to why do they suddenly become red gas creatures?
Because we are bad guys and we have to be red.
Exactly, and that's just, there's no, it's slightly lazy in the sense that there is not even a justification for why we suddenly look evil, because we must suddenly look evil.
For me, I think the first half of the story is the stronger half before we get to the alien element, and I think it really does a good job of capturing that spooky Dickensian Victoriana style of spook show. The language that's used, the characterizations that are there, and I think Simon Callow does a fantastic job as Dickens, and it's always hit or miss when you introduce these famous historical characters. It can go one way or the other, it can become a little bit cheesy and tacky, but I think this really nailed it, and I think it was a genuinely unsettling episode.
I mean, I guess all in the realm of opinion, but with the first episode, Rose was mostly just kind of explaining who everyone was and what the show was. And then we had a sci-fi episode, which, with the End of the World one, which was good but wasn't particularly terrifying or tense. I feel like this was the first episode where they were just like, okay, 45 minutes, this is the story, and we're going to tell the story to our best abilities, and it doesn't, we don't particularly mind if this gets a bit creepy for some people, or if some people don't particularly know who Charles Dickens, this is just the story we're telling.
Yeah, so we have mentioned how I feel, at least, that it goes a little off the boil in the second half, and it loses the horror element when it adapts and adopts the science fiction. I think that it loses the interest as soon as it makes the villains cartoony, and I think that removes some of the tension. I think that removes some of the horror element, and I don't necessarily think you needed to do that. I think they could have kept up the supernatural feel of it without making it supernatural. It almost felt a little Deus Ex Machina in some regards, that it was we've got to the last 5 minutes and we now need to end the story, so we're just going to end the story like this. What did you think about that?
No, I agree. It works really well, as I said, until it goes red, sprouts teeth, and suddenly starts monologuing. I think part of the problem is because they've decided to limit it to the basement, we get into a point where the villains don't really have a larger plan or anything beyond this basement, so they have to... So the story gets smaller. We've been wandering slightly over Cardiff with these multiple locations and multiple dead bodies, and then suddenly we're just in this one basement, and maybe what needed to happen was we needed their power over the rift to kind of spread slightly, and for dead bodies in other parts of the city to start coming back to life, and then have the Doctor having to deal with a problem which isn't just about this one archway in this one basement that needs to be closed and blown up.
Yeah, I think even if we'd done something like go out to a cemetery, the Undertaker's back's onto a cemetery or something, that would have been quite nice to actually see. It would have been genuinely quite scary, even though we know who the Gelth are now, and even though we know that they're aliens trying to come through the rift. I think that could have maintained the fear, because I didn't feel that the possessed human corpses shuffling towards the Doctor as he's in this little cupboard, essentially, with gates on it, railings, it didn't particularly feel that scary. Whereas I think...
Yeah, they were just kind of reaching through.
Yeah.
Not trying to open it, not trying to do anything intelligent, just kind of zombieing it.
That was it. I didn't mind the possessed corpses when they still had a certain amount of agency to them, when they still had a certain amount of individuality to them. It made them interesting. As soon as they became a single group, it became less so, and also became less scary. And I think if they'd taken it out to somewhere like a graveyard and had the last little section of it there, I think that could have definitely ramped up the tension. It could have ramped up the fear, because you're then surrounded by all of these monsters all around instead of just backed into a corner. And outside you've still got gas lamps and things, so you've still got that gas element that can be used. I guess the argument could be that it's outside, so the gas can dissipate a little bit, but it's fiction. You can work around that.
Also, we did see the old woman was able to go outside, so they did set up the possibility of them going outside and being able to survive outside. Also, if you'd had the graveyard, and if you had that many more, then you'd have been able to have some sort of trying to break into other houses in order to kill the inhabitants, which then would have allowed the Doctor to work out what they were trying to do, rather than having the Gelth itself saying, "We are going to do this next after we have killed you." Yes,
it was very cliched villain, that was. And to be fair, Doctor Who does do that quite a bit, to the extent where the Master at several points kind of takes a piss out of that idea. I suppose you expect me to tell you my plan. I don't think. So yeah, I think it definitely had scope for being scarier. I'm guessing part of the reason might be the show's just been relaunched and it's got money thrown at it, but they don't want to spend all that money in in one go, especially as you've got more expensive episodes coming along. For me, it's definitely one of the best episodes of the reboot run. It's one of Eccleston's best episodes, but saying that, Eccleston did 13 episodes, and I don't think there was a clunker among them. And it was nice having these horror elements, that they weren't afraid to really play with them and play with horror tropes. So we have now, I guess, finalised how our horror ranking is going to go. The way it was discussed was scale of 10. Points going to format appropriateness for horror, so something like an episodic sci-fi travelling show being very workable without actually being a typical horror thing. Body count, stays with you after finishing, execution of the villain, overall scariness. So there's 5 of those, and there's 2 points each is what we're going to give. So the first one is appropriateness for horror. How appropriate was the story and the setting and the world for horror?
As Doctor Who, the travelling in a box, different companions, different worlds, different times, works completely for this kind of story, and working together, Cardiff, the Victorian period, Dickens, the Gelth, all of that, without, it never feels like an excuse to do a ghost story. It all works together, and the elements are blended very well together. That's
that
1 point from me.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Okay, so that's 1 point from each of us then. So the next one, body count. Did it have a good body count? I don't know what we're counting as a good body count here. Everything in it was dead, so...
In terms of both Doctor Who overall and in, Doctor Who horror-y episodes, and in terms of the episodes we've done so far compared to Star Trek, I'd say this has a above average body count in terms of non-horror, slightly horror-y media. We have the old lady at the beginning who then kills her grandson,
I think.
Who kills her grandson. Sneed gets killed. Gwyneth
Oh, he gets killed quite bad, nastily, doesn't he? Gets his neck snapped. That's something for prime time family entertainment, isn't it?
So yes, we have at least 3 characters being killed on camera, as well as bodies of previously killed people. At least 5 or 6 in the basement by the end. So yeah, we have corpses on camera, both not animated and then being reanimated and then killing more people. So I'd say in terms of, as a piece of non-horror entertainment, I'd say it definitely pushes the body count. So I'd give it the point.
You'd give it a point? I think I'm going to be a little controversial and different and give it half a point. I'm not sure... I mean, it kills a couple of people, but I don't know, it's... Most of them are already dead.
Okay, fair enough.
So, next, stays with you after finishing.
I think I'm going to go with half a point here, simply because it really works while you're watching it, and it is one of the episodes I've probably rewatched the most, and I do enjoy it, and it is one of my favourite ones. But just because of the issues we've said with the last sort of 10 minutes or so, I don't think it packs as much of a... And especially since we kind of have more of a coda that has more to do with Charles Dickens than anything else, I think it dissipates some of the emotions that it could have left you with beyond the end.
Okay, I am actually going to go with half a point as well for that. Execution of the villain stroke baddie.
I really like the way they're handled in the first half, and a lot of elements of the second half, like them killing Gwyneth on camera and then animating the body and all of that. But on the other hand, I feel, the melodramatic side of them divulging their own plans, and then when we compare them even to other horror-y Doctor Who villains, they're not the most memorable ones, so I guess I'm going to go with half a point as well here.
Okay, you're going to give it half a point. I'm actually not going to give them a point. I don't think the villains are particularly memorable, and above that, I think they squander them. I think they could have been very, very good villains. I think they're too generic, and the last 10 minutes takes so much away from them. I think that we kind of lose anything that's built up up until then, so I'm not going to give any points for that. So finally is overall scariness.
That's a tricky one. I'm the half point man here at this point. Are we doing quarters, or are we doing no point, half point, and full
I mean,
points?
if you absolutely insist on doing quarters, I don't see an argument against it. I mean, this does. I suppose we could always make because dear viewers, we are still finalising the structure. Instead of doing out of 10, we could do it out of 40. So each thing we could give 4 points to instead of 4 quarters, as that's essentially the same difference.
Yeah, I'm really not sure. They work within the episode. The episode is really tense. I don't know if I'd consider them scary by the end of it. So I don't know this. Yeah, I could go for half a point, or I could go for nothing. To be perfectly honest, I'm unsure. What do you think?
I'm actually going to give them in this, as we're still working on the out of 10 structure, I'm going to give it a full point.
Okay, well then, I will go with my half point then.
Okay, so that brings.
Sorry, no. Actually, I will go with. If you're giving them a full point, I will go with no points.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
1 out of 2 seems fair enough to me.
So that brings the Unquiet Dead to 6 points. Or if we're going to be going with the out of 40, which I think we'll have a discussion about between now and the next episode, that would give us 24. I think the out of 40 works, personally. I think instead of working with quarters and halves, we go with 40. So that does give us 24. Viewers, thank you for sticking with us while we finalise that exact scoring system. Going forward, it will be a lot more obvious and clear. So, Oliver, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We did eventually sort out the scoring system and have decided to mark it out of 40, which means the scores for this episode of Horror Not Horror comes to 24. Hi, thanks for watching. Over the next few months, as the world's in lockdown, we're going to be creating all sorts of online content. In order to support us and our participants, then head on over to our Patreon where you can become a patron, where there's all sorts of super rewards. Thank you, and remember, stay inside, wash your hands, and try real hard not to spit in anyone.